Welcome to our second edition of the Behavioural Lens, a podcast that focuses on making culture make sense and translating culture into a series of very practical steps that organisations can consider. My name is Sandro, and this is our second podcast. Today I'm joined by Keith Meekins. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
Keith, I would describe as a friend, a working colleague, somebody who's taught me an awful lot about the world of culture in the high-pressured world of securities trading. Keith, welcome. Thank you for coming along today. I think you could do a far better introduction to your trajectory through the City of London than I can.
Very flattering. Thanks very much. Listen, first of all, it's great to catch up with you. I think we were just talking about it before, 15 odd years ago, that we both got introduced.
You're looking younger, by the way. I'm not too sure I am.
That's the camera fooling you. But thank you again. But yeah, 15 odd years that we met. And we met at a very interesting time for me when I was put into a position of being CEO at Daiwa, which is jumping the gun a little bit in terms of my longevity in the city, which was 40 odd years, which actually started at Swiss Bank back in 1981.
This is Swiss Banking Corp, SBC?
This was actually SBCI, Swiss Bank Corp International, which was the investment arm of Swiss Bank Corporation. And now this was when the bond markets were just evolving, really, to a certain extent. So I've often coined the phrase that I sort of was in the right place to catch the right wave at the right time. And I started off right on the bottom run there as a settlements clerk. But I always had aspirations and an interest in the financial markets to the extent where quite often my father would buy me shares as a present for Christmas or birthday rather than a generic new bike or perhaps a new football. Because I always had an interest in that and that sort of evolved in perhaps where I wanted to take my direction in terms of a career.
Can I just pin you down there? Because obviously I'm very interested. The whole concept.
I was quite young then, yeah.
Well, let's see how your memory works.
Okay.
I'm very interested from a behavioural perspective as to what motivates people. So can I take you back to those younger years? What actually got you out of bed? What motivated you to want to get into the City of London and be successful at SBCI?
I didn't actually have an introduction into the city. No, I had to get in there myself. My father was a chartered surveyor. He worked for Sir Robert McAlpine.
Yeah.
So he was more in the building trade. It was, I guess I wasn't frightened of failure, to be quite honest, and I wasn't frightened of a hard day's work. I had started work at a relatively young age of doing a paper round and then 2 paper rounds, then marking up the papers and then getting golf balls out the lakes and selling them.
Was that about money?
No, it wasn't always about money. I quite often, more often not, enjoyed the company of new people. Now, I was meeting new people. I was meeting different people through that, and I always found that quite interesting. And I always felt I had a good understanding of and being able to understand where people are coming from and what experiences they had, and being quite sympathetic towards it rather than nonchalant, I guess, to a certain extent. So, no, for me, money wasn't the driver. I didn't think to myself, look, everyone in the city is getting paid the big bucks and that's where I want to go. But what it was quite a diverse business. There was a lot of opportunity there. It was a relatively new market. The bond market's probably only 20 or 30 years old back in 19...
I still remember being taught what a Eurobond was back in the late 1970s.
A Eurobond. And now you've got to remember as well, all that was going on then was very much a manual process. Now, you can settle millions in trades almost in the blink of an eyelid now. In those days, it was all manual. And that's how I got my foot in the door, by using my expertise from a settlements perspective in being able to settle and balance the books for all the traders. And they invited me up to sit on their desk every morning, early, 6 o'clock in the morning. I was getting into the office in London and leaving about 11 o'clock at night. So coming back to my original point, I wasn't afraid of that hard work. There was probably one thing in the background that did motivate me a little bit more, and that was that my parents gave me the opportunity to go to a private school.
Yep.
Now, I wasn't academically brilliant, but I was quite good with numbers. And they offered the opportunity for me to go to the school. And And it was quite a big cost for them because they sacrificed quite a lot over those 5 or 6 years that they sent me there. And so in the back of my mind, there was always that I want to reward them, to let them know that they didn't waste their money through doing that. And I saw part of that as being successful in whatever trade I went down. Now, it may not have been investment banking. It could have been the same as my father. But no, I was going to make damn sure that, I gave it a good crack.
But can I understand, at that age, what was the metric of success from your perspective? So clearly what I'm understanding is you want to show your parents that their investment was worth it.
Yeah.
But was money the metric, or was there some other metric of success?
For me, money wasn't the metric, really. When I look back on it now in hindsight, and since you bring up that point, you start to question it. Was it a motivation in the background? It had to be some sort of motivation for sure. You don't want to be pumping in 18-hour days for 2.5, 3 years on the trot and working at weekends without feeling that there may be some financial reward at the back of it. But it wasn't at that stage really the pure motivation for me. The motivation was to get an established career.
Yeah.
At some stage, looking at the ideal world where you have a family and you're married and everything else, and to make sure that I could look after my family the same as my parents had looked after me. I can probably honestly say I think I only ever moved once in my career for financial reasons.
Okay.
And that was in 2000. So, I've been at Namira already for about 16, 17 years before I made that move to Commerzbank. And that was very much more of a financial reason for that move. And that's the only time I can probably answer your question totally honestly and say, yeah, I moved for money. I was financially driven to take that position.
So your move into the trading environment, could you share a little bit more how you moved from the back office, from a settlements job into a trading job?
It wouldn't happen now. That's for sure.
The world has changed.
The world has changed, and I'm very aware of that. I was fortunate. I joined Swiss Bank Core International, and I believe I was the 65th employee to go through the door. So this was a new investment arm. It was being run by some very senior guys. I think 4 of the 6 senior managing directors were from Orion Royal Bank, if you remember.
Yes,
Orion Royal Bank.
Yes, I do.
So a guy called Hans de Geer, Anthony Marshall was there as well. So some quite significant players. And when you're joining a company which is 65 people, and now already I knew quite early on through the interview there was aspirations for it to be significantly bigger than that, and it had the entity of Swiss Bank Corporation behind it as well, which obviously is vast. It wasn't difficult for me to see that this was a good place to sort of be starting my career, and I was very, very fortunate enough to get given the green light through the interview process. But I made it quite clear when I first went in that it was the trading aspect of what interests me, because that was quite a large part of the interview that I had when I spoke to this guy. But I was prepared
because of the maths.
I just found the whole industry interesting. The maths was part of it. Just the ability for a company to be worth next to nothing, and then in a year or 5 years' time to be worth 10, 15, 20 times the value. I didn't understand it all, but I wanted to understand it. And I think because it was such a vast industry, giving you an insight into economics, giving you insight into maths, giving you insight into new issuance and what new developments were coming around the corner. Because quite early days, it was very basic bond issuance that was taking place. You didn't have a derivatives market. You didn't have a futures exchange, even though we've had it and that's now gone. You didn't have options. You didn't have hedging facilities. As I said, it was all manual in a big book.
You were buying an instrument that was going up or down in value.
And a trader had no idea. When I first spoke to a trader and said, "No, what's the cost of you carrying that position?" And he's like, looked at me and said, "Well, what are you talking about?" Well, if you buy that bond and then it's just sitting in your account, that money you could have invested somewhere else. But what's the cost of that? Is there a cost to then deliver it somewhere else? When you sell it, you have to transfer it from Euroclear or Sedel, which are the 2 clearing agents.
You were asking these questions as quite a young man.
Because I had a very fast track education in the back office. And that's what put me in such a good position, to the extent where when I started to talk to a few traders, and I wasn't frightened of going up and having a chat and having a laugh, and quite often the butt of all their jokes as well. But I made it very clear that if they worked with me, I could save them money. And by that, I meant I could make sure that when they were looking to sell bonds back into Switzerland or back into Germany, and there were different clearing agents, that the bonds were in the right place, because they didn't get transferred automatically. Someone physically had to do that. That was me.
And you were convincing them this was good for them.
Well, I didn't just need to convince them. I could show them a P&L which either made them money or saved them money.
Yeah.
Didn't lose them money. If they left it there, they were the ones that lost the money. But with what I was proposing to them was it made them money or it saved them money. And it wasn't long after that process, and when I say long, maybe 2.5, 3 years through my time at Swiss Bank in the support side of the business, that 3 or 4 of them were fighting for my attention to one particular guy called Hans Blum, Swiss-German guy, said, look, I want you working and sitting on my desk. And he was quite an influential guy in the bank at the time. He was one of the more senior traders. And if he wanted something, he generally got it. And I wasn't going to stand in his way because it was exactly what I wanted. So he put me on his desk as a trainee trader. And it was an interesting guy. He used to work for the bank in the morning, trading the bank's positions. And then in the afternoon, he'd be trading his own positions. It was like quite perverse, really. But certainly illegal now, I would have thought.
These are obviously the era pre-compliance functions.
This is pre-FCA. This is pre-regulation, which we will touch on a bit later on, I'm sure. But that wouldn't have happened. But it wasn't. No, you didn't think you were doing necessarily anything wrong then. That's the way it was. And there were some controls, but they were limited controls. You didn't really have a compliance department. You hardly had an audit department there, really, if they were there a little bit in the background.
What motivated Hans?
Money.
Different to you?
Yeah, definitely money for him. Definitely money. To the extent where, because I would have been comfortable just doing a good job for the bank and being paid and working both morning and afternoon. He wasn't. He wanted to do a good job in the morning. And then as far as he was concerned, after lunchtime, he was now going to be focusing on his own activity, which, as I say, you just wouldn't be allowed to do that now because there's been too many conflicts of interest there. But yeah, he was definitely motivated by money. But the people that knew him, the people that I got to know through him were quite influential and wealthy people. So I don't think money was an issue for him, whether he was actually doing that work in the afternoon or not. But I think he enjoyed the fun of it and the game of it, to be honest.
So I guess during this formative stage of your career is probably when you started understanding that people are very different from each other. There is no one size fits all into what makes people tick. I'm just interested in your early reflections in that dealing room.
When I went on the trading desk at Swiss Bank, I was only on that desk for a couple of years, and Hans Blum had gone back to Switzerland. And I was working with a gentleman called Nigel Farmer, who got headhunted to go and work at Nomura. And he told me confidentially he was leaving. And I went, okay, great. And I'm straight away thinking, well, if he's gone, there's another gap there now, so maybe I can go into that. But he wanted me to go with him. And he was offering some pretty significant money to go there. This is the day of the golden hello. Not the golden goodbye, but the golden hello. This was being paid to go somewhere.
I never benefited from one of those, but as an auditor, what do you expect?
I was lucky. I tend to keep quiet about that nowadays. But no, I was. But again, the money was one attraction. But I knew I could probably make that sort of money where I was at Swiss Bank.
Yeah.
But the attraction for me was that Nigel was going to Nomura to set up the government bond trading desk, and they didn't have a government bond trading desk, so it was being part of something new, which really attracted me to that.
Was a motivating factor.
That was a real motive, and it cropped up 1 or 2 times later on in my career as well. Yeah. Very much a motivating. It's not often you get an opportunity to be part of something which you feel is going to be pretty big in the future, but be part of the initiation and the conception of it. Again, that's just being in the right place at the right time in terms of time. But that was a big driving force, and that was. So when I went back to my father, And I said to him, I said, Dad, no, I'm thinking about leaving. He's going, what are you talking about? He said, no, Swiss Bank are treating you like a king. Why would you want to leave? And I said, well, no, this opportunity's come up. He said, yeah, but how do you know it's going to be successful? And I went, yeah, but they're also paying me this. And then he's gone, I can understand why you're going there. And I said to him, because he asked a similar question, now, are you going just for money? Are you sure that's the right decision? And I said, no, it's not. It's the opportunity. And that was probably one of the best decisions I made in terms of my career, of being part of that new government trading desk. And ultimately, I became a specialist in the Spanish and Italian government markets, which were the markets to be involved in the mid-90s as conversion took place against the euro, as we saw the futures exchange open up with not just a German contract, but also an Italian contract. And and a lot of issuance was coming out of Italy.
So you were
as well.
certainly at the frontier of innovation, given the advent of derivative markets coming into play. This was a very new...
much so. And everything I've spoken about there, I haven't really touched on systems or platforms, but that was the real significant change, because we used to have an open outcry market on the life market. That then became automated, so everyone then you didn't have locals sitting in the pit as such. It wasn't a physical transaction per se, and it was the change on how you managed your pricing platform. Because you were talking about, on a government trading desk, you could be pricing up 500, 700 different bonds, and a client could come in and ask you for a price in $100 million or sterling or euro later on, or pesetas or lira. It could have been any one of those currencies early doors. And if you get it wrong, you'd be losing the company a lot of money. So you had to have a platform where all the logarithms and algorithms in the background were, you 100% trusted what was there. I wasn't anywhere near capable of writing something like that, but this is where the sophisticated IT guys sort of got more involved in the system and became probably better paid than we did at the end of the day. But that made a difference. And the Telematica, which was the Italian platform, which was the one that I was quite heavily involved in, was something which we developed more when I was at Commerzbank back in 2000, 2001, and ultimately was a platform that Dial became interested in 2003. And when they asked me to show them, they wanted to, I thought, just buy that platform or buy a part of the ownership of it. But in fact, they were actually trying to get hold of me, because throughout that conversation, they then became quite clear that not only did they want the platform, but they wanted me to run that platform at Daiwa.
We're going to explore whether you got a second big golden hello before you joined Daiwa in a moment. But how was success?
It wasn't a golden hello that time. That was slightly different, but that was a bit more level.
Okay. How was success measured from your perspective in that middle phase of your career?
As a trader, I'm trying to think of sort of an analogy. A trader's a little bit like the centre forward in a way on the football pitch. Now, you've got a lot of people sort of doing things.
We used to have a few of those at Chelsea, but
quite a few years ago, I would have thought. But there's a lot of people doing a lot for you on the periphery. But no, you're sitting in there making the big decisions. And for me, I saw a lot of traders change from being a personable, friendly individual to very greedy, a non-team player. Certainly the team aspect disappeared, purely focused on bottom line P&L.
So purely money changed these characters?
Absolutely. And I would have said probably 75% of them, that ended up being their downfall as well, because it did. For me, now I have already touched on the fact I enjoyed meeting people. I enjoyed talking to people. I enjoyed, more than anyone else, going out with a salesman and meeting the client. And the clients loved that. They really did. They really enjoyed the opportunity to speak to the trader who's at the coalface, if you want, of what's going on.
Can I focus on that, Keith? You say you enjoyed meeting the client, but did you enjoy showcasing your talents to the client? Because you're clearly there in a sales meeting as the expert in the room on the bond markets.
Um, I hope it didn't come over that way, to be quite honest, because that wasn't my intention. No, my intention.
There's nothing wrong with being seen as an expert.
My intention was, no, I wanted this client to deal with Daiwa more than anyone else. How could I get that to happen? If I was a personal individual, not at the end of the phone, but the next contact on from the salesperson, he knew who I was and he could trust me. And that was a big factor. The fact he had met me face to face and we built up that element of trust, it became much more beneficial for both of us in terms of how I executed his business and how I could not only perform well for him, because that's what I'm trying to do, but also perform well for the bank as well. So now I found it as a bit of a double-edged sword in a good way, really, to a certain extent. But no, being able to build up that trust with a client was quite unusual and quite unique, because a lot of salespeople wouldn't want to do that because they wouldn't want to lose control of their client. But I think a lot of salespeople saw that was one of my big strengths, of having that sort of relationship which I could develop with a client. And they could sit back, didn't feel threatened by it at all. And if anything, probably would benefit out of what was going on because they were getting paid commission the same as I would getting paid if I performed well.
When I look at the relationship between the sales person or the sales function and the trading function, it's always been, at worst, a very uneasy relationship. At best, it's a team collaborative relationship. You're using the words of collaboration, teamwork, some form of affinity to the organisation that employs you. Can you share a little bit more as to how that felt at the time?
Well, I was different. I don't think there was. I don't want this to sound pig-headed, but I don't think there was any coincidence that I ended up going from a settlements clerk to being a CEO of a bank.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why is, I think, to a certain extent, of why I was quite different to a lot of other people. I wanted that relationship with the client. I wasn't just purely influenced by that bottom line P&L. I wanted the salesperson to trust the desk, because at the moment we're talking about me as just an individual trader. Later on, I became head of fixed income, which meant I was not only trading my own book, which was Italian and Spanish market, but I was also responsible for everyone else. And it was very important for me to know that the clients that were talking, not just to me, to other people as well, trusted us and there weren't going to be any issues. And we've got to remember as well, through this period of time, what was the FSA, now the FCA, was becoming more and more prominent in the background. So there were certain things that you could and couldn't do before, talking to a client, sometimes direct. There could have been a conflict of interest at some stage later on down the road. At this moment in time, there wasn't any conflict at that point. But and then taking that position of being head of fixed income, the biggest challenge was and I was part of the remuneration for the salespeople as well. How do we pay the salesperson? How do we pay the trader? How do we pay a successful trader in a year when the bank hasn't been successful?
Yes.
Which is another big challenge. And it became quite obvious and quickly to me when I was involved in that seat that there wasn't one solution fixes everything. If anything, far from it. And that was probably one of the biggest challenges, I think, throughout my management career, and certainly through the position of being CEO, of how we appeased, and now we're going back onto when I was at Daiwa, how I appeased the Japanese management who weren't used to this sort of remuneration process, how I satisfied the remuneration committee at board level run by the Neds, how I satisfied the regulator, how I satisfied my staff, and ultimately where did I come in on that as well? And it was a bloodbath sometimes. It really was.
Can we focus on one of those key stakeholders? You and I both started our careers in the city when there was no meaningful regulation of behaviour. And obviously the regulator suddenly appeared at some point in time and started getting really intrusive in terms of behaviour and rewards. Can you just share your reflections on the impact regulation had on your career?
Yeah. As soon as anyone asked me that question, I sort of got a bit of a shiver up my spine, really, because They didn't always make it easy. You know, if I can just go back perhaps a step on this.
Of course.
No, we were a subsidiary in London. We were separately capitalised. We had a lot of capital, probably too much capital.
This was Daiwa Capital Markets.
Daiwa Capital Markets. Yeah. We weren't a branch. We had branches in Europe, which came under my umbrella as well, but we were separately capitalised. So the regulator knew that we had enough money there to cause damage. We were a second-tier bank, I think is probably fair to say.
Yeah.
No, we weren't the JP Morgans or the Merrill Lynches of this world, but there was an expectation, irrespective of being a second-tier bank, from the regulator that if the first-tier banks were adhering to a new change or a particular requirement, that is what the second-tier bank should be aiming for.
Yeah.
That caused quite a few complications. Now, the regulator came out with the idea about capping bonuses.
This is post the global financial crisis.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
They wanted to cap bonuses. So what did all the American banks do? Well, they just increased everyone's salary.
Yeah.
I didn't want to follow that because I was trying to control fixed costs in London, and I had head office in Tokyo beating the drum every month, asked me why costs were increasing and why we were paying so much money to employ new people. And of course, that was the other downside of it. As we want to employ more people, American banks were putting salaries up over here for us to try and entertain and headhunt anyone to come and work for us. We were now having a sort of two-tier salary platform. People that were new were up here, and people that had been at the company for a long time were down here, and that caused a lot of unrest as well. So, it was a big challenge, and the regulator weren't very happy with the Japanese, not just Daiwa, but the Japanese in general, because they had a habit of parachuting, for want of a better word, senior people into senior roles in London. Now, there had never been a CEO, out and out CEO position in Daiwa. I was the first non-Japanese CEO, but I was the first CEO per se in London. But we also had a Japanese chairman. And that Japanese chairman always thought that generally they came over and it was just a reward for doing a good job, maybe in a head office in Hong Kong or back home in Tokyo. It was a reward. Come to London, you'd meet the clients, you could play your golf and you could have a nice time for 3 years. And early on, that perhaps worked, but the regulator soon got wind of this and they were very unhappy that these people were being parachuted in. And so what they started to do is the regulators were interviewing these senior people coming in now. And some of these interviews didn't always go as well as we had hoped. And they decided that they no longer wanted a Japanese senior member coming in. At that time, chairman stroke CEO, and they wanted now a separate CEO, and he had to be locally employed. So my name was actually put forward for that. There were 6 people that went for it, and I was by far the least qualified. By far.
In terms of leading and managing?
In terms of my experience of not being on a board ever.
Yeah.
Now, I'd reported into a board of head of fixed income, and no, I wasn't frightened of going in and being quite vocal, and I think that's some of the attractions that the regulator quite liked, as well as the board. But it was, the fact that I not only ended up with the job, but I got past the second interview, I was quite amazed. But what I didn't realise and what I subsequently found out afterwards was what the Japanese wanted was they wanted a Western individual who understood the Japanese culture.
Right.
They understood how a Japanese bank works.
Yeah.
They understood and accepted the way the Japanese bank worked to the extent that I was prepared to do it. Because at the end of the day, if Tokyo weren't really happy, they could just close up shop and go back home.
But can I just understand this transition? You'd risen to become the head of fixed income trading at what was one of the world's largest financial services institutions, Daiwa. You described Daiwa as a second-tier bank in London.
Politely.
But Daiwa at the end of the day was a major operator in the international markets. Yeah. But you were the head of fixed income trading.
Can I just So when I made that comment about Daiwa, that was Daiwa Capital Markets in London.
Yes.
Obviously, Daiwa in Tokyo is the second biggest out there behind Nomura. But But you had a very prominent trading position.
with presumably a very prominent variable compensation package to go with it. How did they persuade you to take on the role of CEO?
Oh, good question.
I don't know. How did they persuade you in monetary terms? I'm not asking you to disclose your pay package, but
to be honest, they didn't really. I had been fortunate. I had been rewarded very well in my career up until then. And now I was getting to a stage where trading was becoming harder and harder.
Yeah.
The electronic trading platforms, technology was taking over a lot of what I had up here, which I relied on in terms of speed. With the press of a button, it was much, much quicker than what I could do. And now I was thinking from a longevity point of view, where do I see myself sitting? And did I see myself sitting in a trading seat 10 years down the road from now? If my body survived that much or survived that period. And I think took almost a subconscious decision that maybe I'd done my time as a trader, and now I'm in a position where I'm being supported by a regulator. I'm being supported by a board in London. I'm being supported by ultimately what became my executive committee.
Yep.
And ironically, the people that had always been the most challenging for me, I was now being supported by Tokyo management. Maybe they felt they didn't have much of a choice. I don't know. There were, as I said, 5 other people that went for the role, but no, they didn't. The Japanese senior management didn't know those individuals like they knew me. So I guess it's the old adage, isn't it? No, the devil you know rather than the devil you don't.
Yeah.
But going back to your question, when I look back on it, I penalised myself quite significantly financially. I never ever
You and I had many of those conversations.
I never ever earned the same money that I was earning when I was trading.
So you took a big pay cut.
My salary went up, but my overall compensation didn't.
Yeah.
And why was that? Well, when you're trading, it's very easy. Your P&L's up or down. After you take costs, roughly you would be thinking you get paid 8 to 10% of what your bottom line was. Yeah. So if you made 5 million for the bank after costs, it's not difficult to work out where you'd expect your sort of remuneration to sort of be coming in. And some traders would make a lot more than 5 million, and other traders would lose. And that's the problem when you become a CEO. I couldn't just rely on my own performance. I'm now looking at everyone else's performance. I've got 6, 7 other business areas: convertibles, equities, debt capital markets, bonds, new issuance, futures operation.
What did you learn as CEO in terms of what motivates the human being?
God, what did I learn? I learned a lot. What I think the one thing I learned very early on, and this goes back to when we sort of first met, it's a bloody lonely position.
Yes.
A really lonely position. Yes. Now, I was sitting on a desk before that with a group of traders. I was running the operation. I trusted everyone that was working for me. They trusted me. When it came to comp, I could reward them appropriately. I was very honest. If someone wasn't performing, I would tell them early on that the way things are going, you're not going to get paid this year. But when you're a CEO, I couldn't just look at fixed income or government trading. I had to look at everything. And, you don't always get a home run on every shot. So, if you've got 6 or 7 businesses and 3 of them are making money, but 4 of them are losing money, how do you pay people? You've got a break-even business maybe at best at that stage. You've got to pay people in the 3 businesses that have performed. You can't not pay people on the other business as such. So we had to sort of come up with some sort of formula. So what we did, which wasn't anything new, and the regulators encouraged it as well, we sort of came in more with deferrals. And that was a way of me being able to manage that position, not brilliantly, but to a certain extent. So, I could pay people over here, and maybe the people I paid over there last year had made money, but rather than me paying all that money in one go up front, I'd defer it over 3 years.
So you weren't robbing Peter to pay Paul. You were essentially
I'd defer it. So if that individual had made 5 million, and let's say if he got paid £500,000 as a bonus, then I would give him 200 of that and defer over the next 2 years 150 and 150.
Yeah.
as an example. And then if in year 2, if he didn't make money or lost money, he wouldn't get that deferral. Now, it wasn't always that easy to implement. No, sometimes there can be some legal ramifications behind that scenario. So we have to be quite careful and articulate on how it was worded. But ultimately, everyone sort of understood, yeah, you can get paid well, but you have to be able to reward people if they perform well in a bad year. And so that was a big challenge. And that was something that the Japanese really struggled with. And you've got to remember, if we talk about Japan a little bit now, no, the Japanese didn't get paid bonuses like that. No, they would start off on the ladder here. They would sit in a position for 3 years, and I used to call it, they'd get on the escalator, and they'd go up to the next run, and they would jump off, and they would spend another 3 years doing something else. And as long as they didn't upset anyone or do a disaster of a job, they would jump back on again, and they would go up to the next level. Each time they jump back on the escalator, end of the financial year, they would get maybe shares, but their remuneration would be based within a criteria of being in the company for 3 to 6 years or 6 to 9 years, and it would be a relatively small range. And if you hadn't done a very good job, you would be at the lower end of that small range. And if you'd done a good job, you would be at the higher end of that range. But the difference for someone who was doing a really good job and really successful and making good money for the bank in Tokyo wasn't really there. And that caused a bit of an issue for Tokyo later on, sorry to interrupt, because a lot of the Americans were all sitting there on the touchline thinking, yeah, we want some of those. No, do you think if Dairo Nomura got one of the top JGB traders, and you got JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley are also trading the yen as well, no, they want this guy, and it's not going to be too difficult to prize him away. And we saw quite a bit of that later on, where some of the good, more westernized sort of Japanese people working in Tokyo perhaps had done a 3-year stint overseas and had gone back to Japan again, decided to leave and go and work for the Americans to get paid a different structure.
I'm interested in the difference in motivating factors between the Japanese and your typical Anglo-Saxon trader sitting in London or New York. I mean, clearly, if you're sitting in London or New York, you're getting paid a lot more money than your average Japanese trader that could be contributing the same amount of money. What motivated, in your view, your typical Japanese trader?
I'm going to spin it around a little bit.
Yeah.
What motivated the non-Japanese, and that was keeping their job.
Right.
Because, I had to make quite a few people redundant in my time as CEO, even throughout my career, really, to a certain extent. Very, very few people would ever get made redundant in Japan. So there was slightly different motivations there. There was a big motivation to be successful if you're a non-Japanese, and sometimes people would push that right to the edge. So you had to make sure that people were towing the line, within all the rules and regulations, and that's something the regulator would be very focused on. And what I would say is I think Tokyo, towards the back end of my career, started to understand that you had to reward the Japanese differently to how they were being rewarded, which was basically shares within the company. We didn't get paid shares.
Yeah.
I would like to have been paid shares, but they wouldn't do it. People only got paid shares if you were Japanese. You could get paid shares if you were working in London, but you had to be an expat over from Tokyo. But I think it was because we started to have some more westernized Japanese management who had spent time running the US office, who had spent time running Singapore or Hong Kong, and realized that if they carried on the way they were going, they wouldn't have the staff to enable the business to perform. And they wouldn't be able to attract any new staff, because the other big issue not the issue, but one of the other big criteria for these big Japanese banks is to make sure they get a good intake from the graduates.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they are the company in 10, 15 years' time.
The lifeblood of the future.
And if they don't, and if they can't attract them, because let's face it, if you're a graduate, you're Japanese, where do you want to go? I'll go and work in Nomura, or I'll go and work at an American bank, and Already they're going to be getting paid $75,000 rather than $50,000 as a graduate. So that was becoming an issue as well. But the Japanese management in Daiwa was smart enough to realise that. So they started to change and become more westernised. But of course, that brought much more attention from the regulator in Japan, who interestingly was probably, in my experience, probably the second best regulator outside of the UK. And they used to talk to the UK regulator a lot. And we used to be a bit of a soundboard for them in London into Tokyo, and then the head office in Tokyo into the regulator. So ultimately, we ended up having some really good relationships with them. But
we've touched on fear of losing jobs. I still remember working with you in relation to a number of guys that had basically lost their, risk appetite for trading. In other words, fear had set in following the global financial crisis. How do you try and deal with fear in a trading environment?
Yeah. Quite often those people don't survive, really, to be quite honest. It's not a good trait to have as a trader to be in fear. Fear sometimes can be good because then that people will trade within their parameters and the risk management that we give them. But, I don't think I ever had anyone sitting at my desk for longer than 3 months who would have come under the category of sort of like trading under the umbrella of fear. What did happen quite a lot was that I used to call it handcuffed a little bit by the Japanese. It was quite weird because you'd expect to get handcuffed if you'd lost a bit of money, but quite often we get handcuffed when we've made a lot of money, which because they were like,
let's keep our gains.
They were scared that we either we were going to increase risk, which we were because we were heavily monitored by our risk department and very strict criteria. And if you broke risks, then not only would the bank be on you, but also the regulator would be on me. Certainly when I was running fixed income, they would have been on me as well as being the CEO. So I don't recollect really people trading under the umbrella of fear, other than the fact that if they weren't doing a particularly good job, they probably had fear of losing their job. But for me, that came a little bit with the job to a certain extent. You can't be in a business where the stakes are pretty high and think that if you fail,
you'll pay the risk premium for that environment.
And if you fail, you're going to get away with it. It doesn't happen.
Keith, you've obviously now left Daiwa. How many years ago now?
5 years ago.
So what's life look like for you nowadays?
Very different. Very different.
I can imagine.
I was talking to the cab driver when we came over from Victoria Station, and he asked me what I've been up to. And I get asked that question a lot, what I've been up to, and quite often I'm struggling to really find out what I'm doing. It's the old adage that, you sort of tend to see time sort of drift by. But, just being at home and enjoying. I'm now married.
Congratulations.
To Angela. Got married last year. So I'm now very much enjoying that. Live down on the coast near Deal. Very different environment, very relaxed, very slow pace. But what it has given me more time, you're going to laugh about this, for me to look at the financial markets for myself. So I spend quite a lot of time. Angela is not...
You're still trading?
Yeah, myself, yeah. Angela gets very frustrated that I'll wake up in the middle of the night and put my phone on, and I'm sort of talking to her. I say, I can't believe the Dow closed that low. She goes, "What are you doing?" And I've got my shares have come down, I've always enjoyed it. For me, working in the city was a job, but at the same time, it was also something that. Can I say it was a hobby as well? I don't know whether that's the appropriate word, but it felt like that, and it certainly feels like that now. So I spend quite a lot of time on that. I'm trying to do better on my golf. I'm back onto a Kingsdown and Warmer Golf Club,
okay,
in a great location. Luckily I get a few golf balls coming in the garden from the worst players than me, so that helps because I'm pretty poor. So, but I'm just doing different things. I'm travelling a little bit more. Just come back from Florence last week.
Beautiful part of the world.
It was a beautiful part of the world. Yeah, got educated, which was a change. Learned a little bit. Saw a few Rembrandts, which is about as close as I'm ever going to get to one of those. Now looking to go up to Scotland in April. And I've got there's a few things I want to tick off. I want to go salmon fishing in Scotland or Ireland and catch a wild salmon. That's on my list of
Fantastic.
things to do. I could take the easier route and go up to Iceland or Canada, but no. I think the fish of 10,000 casts, I think people call it. But just the opportunity to travel more, spend a bit more time with my family. My mother's still alive. She's 93. Bless her. So now I'm able to spend... I don't spend more time with her. I am able to see her more often, probably, as
Yes.
I sort of keep the time a little bit sort of tighter. And as always, I enjoy my food. So I'm always having to try and think about how I can enjoy my food and not get too overweight. So that's always a bit of a challenge.
Well, this afternoon, knock that off. I've got a wonderful Italian restaurant planned for you.
Okay, I'll have a salad.
Keith, thank you very much. It sounds to me as if your life of curiosity has served you very well.
Thank you very much. I look back on it and I think I was very fortunate, very lucky, and there was a bit of luck in there, that's for sure. But a bit of hard work in the background as well. If you prepare to work hard, I think you can achieve what you want.
It's been a privilege sharing this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, a wonderful insight into human motivation in the City of London, in the dealing room, but in the world of managing people as a chief executive officer. And Keith's still got the trading bug. There's definitely a second conversation to be had. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.